When we think of the great escapes of the Second World War, our minds almost invariably conjure images of Stalag Luft III, or the grim fortress of Colditz, tales of Allied ingenuity unfolding against a backdrop of European forests and Gothic castles. Much has been written, filmed, and celebrated about those audacious bids for freedom. But what if I told you that one of the most meticulously planned and technically ambitious escapes of the entire war didn't happen in the heart of the Third Reich, but in the last place anyone would ever expect the sun-scorched, unforgiving plains of East Texas? In the summer of 1944, within a Spartan camp built on Blackland Prairie, a conspiracy was taking root, a testament to the fact that the hunger for liberty knows no geographic bounds. Here's how a forgotten chapter of the war, played out thousands of miles from the front lines, earned its place in the hidden history of defiance. By 1944, the United States had become an unlikely jailer for the Axis. Following the collapse of the Afrika Korps and the steady grind of the war in Europe, a staggering number of German soldiers found themselves shipped across the Atlantic. As documented by the Office of the Provost Marshal General, over 425,000 prisoners of war were housed in more than 500 camps across America. This vast, continent-spanning archipelago of confinement was governed by the strict, yet surprisingly humane, edicts of the 1929 Geneva Convention. This international treaty, designed to prevent indignities against enemy soldiers, was followed to the letter by the War Department, largely out of a pragmatic fear of reciprocal brutality against Allied prisoners held in Germany. The foundational objectives of the convention dictated everything from the caloric content of meals to the prohibition against using prisoners for war-related labor. In Texas, this policy created a surreal landscape. At camps like Camp Hearne, a sprawling facility located halfway between Dallas and Houston, the war felt both intimately close and impossibly distant. Here, thousands of German soldiers, veterans of Stalingrad, El Alamein, and the Battle of the Bulge found themselves living under a vast, indifferent sky. The camp was Spartan. As records attest, it was a city of tar paper barracks arranged in rigid formation, surrounded by the ubiquitous double rows of barbed wire and watched over by guards on elevated wooden towers. There were no gas chambers, no systematic brutality. The true enemy here was a combination of crushing monotony, profound isolation, and the sheer, soul-destroying scale of the landscape. For a soldier accustomed to the compact geography of Europe, the Texas prairie was a psychological weapon. It was an ocean of land, flat and featureless, stretching to a horizon that promised nothing but more of the same. Escape wasn't just a matter of clearing a fence, it was a matter of conquering a continent. And yet, for a select group of men inside Camp Hearne, that is precisely what they intended to do. History is driven by policy and grand strategy, but it is lived by individuals. Inside Camp Hearne, the abstract rules of the Geneva Convention gave way to a complex, fiercely ideological society. As in most American POW camps, the prisoners were not a monolith. The population was a volatile mixture of disillusioned conscripts who were tired of the war, and ardent, fanatical Nazis who saw the camp not as a prison, but as a temporary setback, a piece of the Reich overseas. These hardliners, often non-commissioned officers from the SS or the Gestapo, ruled their barracks with an iron fist. As documented in War Department reports on prisoner morale, they held kangaroo courts for those whose loyalty to Hitler was deemed insufficient, doling out harsh discipline. It was within this cauldron of suspicion and simmering tension that the escape plan was born. Not from the zealots, but from the pragmatists. The driving force was Captain Jürgen Reinert, a former U-boat engineer captured in the Atlantic. Reinert was not a political firebrand. He was a man of schematics, dress calculations, and quiet, methodical determination. He saw the war as a problem of physics and engineering that Germany was now losing. For him, captivity was an equation to be solved. He found his collaborators not in the Nazi ideologues, whom he distrusted as loud and reckless, but in men like himself, aviators, artillery officers, and infantrymen who possessed practical skills and an unyielding desire to simply be free. His right-hand man was Oberleutnant Franz Becker, a charismatic former Luftwaffe pilot whose public persona as a cheerful, compliant prisoner made him the perfect organizer, capable of moving through the camp and acquiring materials without raising suspicion. The idea began. as it always does. In hushed conversations after the nightly head count, it was fueled by contraband maps pieced together from National Geographic magazines found in the camp library and by whispered reports of the Allied landings in Normandy. For men like Reinert, the news of D-Day was a death knell for Germany, but it was also a catalyst. As he saw it, their duty was no longer to the Führer, but to themselves. Their goal was not to rejoin a failing war, but to reach the nearest neutral territory, Mexico, a seemingly impossible 400 miles to the south. The plan they began to formulate in the suffocating heat of the Texas summer was audacious in its scope. It would not be a simple dash for the wire. It would be a masterpiece of engineering, deception, and logistics. An underground railroad built directly beneath the feet of their American captors. But to succeed, it had to remain an absolute secret, not just from the guards, but from the dangerous fanatics who shared their barracks. The operational heart of the Camp Hearne escape was a project of such scale and complexity, it resembled a clandestine industrial enterprise, a secret operation that became known among the conspirators as the Ghost Factory. Captain Reinert's plan was centered on a tunnel, but his vision went far beyond a simple burrow. He envisioned a subterranean highway, stable and sustainable for the passage of dozens of men. The chosen starting point was the floor of Barracks 27, beneath a large, seldom used heating stove. Over weeks, the plotters carefully loosened the floorboards, creating a hidden trapdoor. The excavation that followed was a marvel of resourcefulness. The primary challenge was the Texas soil, adense, sticky clay that was murderously difficult to dig. The tools were primitive, fashioned from scavenged mess kits, sharpened bed slats, and a stolen coal shovel. As the tunnel pushed forward, its engineering became more sophisticated. Reinert, applying his U-boat knowledge, designed a shoring system using wooden slats, stolen piece by piece from bunk beds and construction sites around the camp. Every slat was a risk, its absence potentially noted in a barracks inspection. To illuminate the suffocating darkness, a former Luftwaffe electrician tapped into the camp's own power grid, running a thin, insulated wire from the barracks' electrical junction down into the earth, powering a series of low-wattage bulbs purloined from storage closets. This secret 170-foot tunnel was equipped with lighting and an air bellows. Perhaps most brilliant was the ventilation system. As the tunnel lengthened, the air grew foul and dangerously low in oxygen. The team constructed a bellows from a waterproofed duffel bag and a wooden frame, connecting it to a long pipeline made of linked Klim powdered milk cans, their ends removed. A team of prisoners worked in shifts, tirelessly pumping fresh air to the diggers at the tunnel face. The excavated dirt, tons of it, was the single greatest threat to their secrecy. It was painstakingly packed into canvas sacks, hoisted out, and then distributed with microscopic care. Some was hidden in the ceiling crawl spaces of the barracks. Some was mixed into the soil of the camp's celebrated vegetable gardens, and much of it was carried, pocketful by pocketful, to be discreetly dumped into the camp's drainage ditches during periods of heavy rain. While the tunnel progressed, other cells of the Ghost Factory were busy. A former commercial artist forged a collection of stunningly accurate travel permits and military passes, complete with official-looking stamps carved from the rubber heels of boots. Others worked as tailors, expertly altering their German uniforms into plausible civilian attire. It was a silent, nocturnal industry, a conspiracy of craftsmen working towards a single moment of freedom. For 6 months, the secret of the tunnel was the most valuable and fragile commodity in Camp Hearne. Secrecy was a suffocating, round-the-clock burden, and the primary threat often came from within. The camp's ardent Nazi faction, led by a particularly brutal Feldwebel named Klaus Richter, posed a constant danger. Richter and his acolytes viewed any activity outside their control with deep suspicion and enforced their own brutal discipline. An unauthorized escape attempt, especially one organized by pragmatic officers like Reinert, whom they considered ideologically soft, would be seen as a betrayal. Betrayal meant exposure to the Americans, or worse, a summary execution by a kangaroo court in the middle of the night. Reinert and Becker orchestrated a masterful campaign of counterintelligence. They created a tiered system of security. A network of lookouts, code-named Eagles, was posted at all hours. They developed a sophisticated system of silent signals. A book placed upside down on a windowsill meant an unexpected guard patrol. A towel hung in a specific way signaled an all clear. The digging itself was done only at night, its noise masked by a camp choir that Becker had conveniently organized. The choir's nightly rehearsals, filled with loud, patriotic German songs, became the perfect acoustic cover for the scraping and thudding happening 20 feet below ground. The American Guards, for their part, were a mix of complacency and overconfidence. As detailed in post-war debriefings by the War Department, the prevailing attitude at many stateside camps was that escape was essentially impossible. The vast distances and the prisoners' obvious foreignness made the very idea seem suicidal. This institutional arrogance was the escapees' greatest ally. The guards conducted their head counts and inspections with a routine laziness, never thinking to probe the loose floorboards under a cold stove or question the surprising fertility of a particular patch of the camp garden. The conspirators exploited this psychology, with Becker maintaining a friendly, almost subservient rapport with the American camp administrators. He volunteered his men for work details, organized soccer tournaments, and became a model of prisoner cooperation, all while overseeing the final, critical stages of the most elaborate escape plot on American soil. The secret held, a fragile bubble of defiance protected by layers of lies, misdirection, and the sheer audacity of hiding something so immense in plain sight. The night chosen for the escape was the 16th of December. A cold front was sweeping across Texas, bringing with it a low, thick ceiling of clouds and a promised drizzle, perfect conditions to obscure the moon and muffle any sound. Inside Barracks 27, the atmosphere was electric, with a silence more profound than any noise. The 25 men selected for the breakout assembled, their faces pale in the dim light. They were stripped down to essentials, their forged papers, a small amount of bartered food, and their disguised clothing worn under their POW uniforms. Captain Reinert gave the final briefing in a low whisper. His voice calm and steady, he went over the plan one last time: exit the tunnel, cut through the outer perimeter fence during a predicted gap in the patrol schedule, split into small groups of 2 and 3, and head south. Their first objective was the nearby Brazos River, which they would follow downstream as a guide. The trapdoor was opened. One by one, the men descended into the damp, narrow blackness. The crawl was agonizing. The tunnel, which had seemed a spacious marvel during construction, was now a claustrophobic tube. They moved in a single, slow-moving line, pushing their small bundles ahead of them, the air thick with the smell of earth and sweat. At the far end, a vertical shaft led up to just beneath the surface. The final layer of dirt had been left intentionally thin. After a tense wait, the lead man gently pushed upward. The soil gave way, and a rush of cool, damp night air filled the shaft. They had emerged precisely as planned, in a shallow drainage ditch just beyond the camp's inner security lighting, but still inside the main perimeter fence. The next 10 minutes were the most dangerous of their lives. Lying flat on the damp ground, they watched the silhouette of the guard on the nearest tower. Just as the patrol schedule predicted, he reached the far end of his walk, turned, and began his slow march away from their position. This was the moment. Armed with heavy-duty wire cutters forged in the camp's metal shop, 2 men scrambled forward. The metallic snap times of the wire cutting through the chain-link fence sounded like a rifle shot in the tense silence. One by one, the men slipped through the opening, their hearts pounding against their ribs. They were out. Once clear of the immediate perimeter, they shed their POW uniforms, leaving them in a neat pile as a final, defiant gesture. Then, without a word, they split into their designated groups and melted into the vast, ink-black darkness of the Texas night. Behind them, Camp Hearne slept on, oblivious to the fact that 24 ghosts had just walked through its walls. The discovery was made at the 6 a.m. roll call. The count came up 25 men short. At first, it was assumed to be a clerical error, but a frantic search of the barracks quickly revealed the neatly discarded uniforms and, eventually, the impossibly well-concealed trapdoor under the stove in Barracks 27. The camp commander, a by-the-book major who had dismissed all rumors of unrest as fantasy, was reportedly dumbstruck. As word of the tunnel's sophistication spread, disbelief turned to grudging admiration, and then to panic. A prison break of this scale from a stateside camp was unprecedented and a profound embarrassment to the U.S. Army. Within hours, the largest manhunt in Texas history was underway. The alarm went out to every law enforcement agency in the state. The Federal Bureau of Investigation was called in, establishing a command post in the nearby town of Bryan. Local sheriffs and their deputies, many of whom were older men more accustomed to chasing cattle rustlers than German commandos, set up roadblocks on every major highway. Army units from nearby bases were mobilized, deploying patrols on foot, in jeeps, and even on horseback to scour the dense woods and river bottoms along the Brazos. The official reaction, as detailed in declassified FBI teletypes from that week, was a mixture of organized procedure and barely concealed chaos. Descriptions of the escapees, many of them inaccurate, were broadcast on local radio stations, urging citizens to be on the lookout for men with strange accents or suspicious behavior. Meanwhile, the escapees were fighting their own war against the landscape. Reinert's group successfully reached the Brazos River, but the going was brutal. The terrain was a tangle of thick undergrowth, rattlesnakes, and fire ants. The cold December rain turned the blackland soil into a slick, energy-sapping mud. While they had planned meticulously for the breakout, they had fatally underestimated the harshness of the Texas wilderness and the resourcefulness of the local population. Their plan to hop a southbound freight train was thwarted by increased security at every rail yard. For several days, they were phantoms, glimpsed only by a handful of rural farmers who reported seeing strange men moving through the woods at dusk. They managed to survive on stolen vegetables and raw fish from the river, but their civilian clothes were quickly becoming tattered rags, and their spirits were beginning to fray under the strain of constant vigilance and physical exhaustion. The illusion of freedom was proving to be a harsh and fleeting thing. The net began to close within a week. The first group was caught near a small town south of College Station, hungry and exhausted. They had risked entering a general store to buy food. The storekeeper, a veteran of the First World War, immediately grew suspicious of their heavy German accents and the oddly stiff feel of their forged currency. He quietly signaled his wife, who called the local sheriff. The men were arrested without a fight, their faces etched with a mixture of relief and bitter disappointment. This incident set the pattern for the captures that followed. The escapees' greatest weakness was not a failure of planning, but their unavoidable otherness. In the close-knit, homogeneous communities of rural 1,944 Texas, strangers stood out, and strangers with German accents were immediately suspect. Franz Becker, the charismatic pilot, was captured after he and his partner were found sleeping in a farmer's hayloft. The farmer held them at gunpoint with a shotgun until the authorities arrived. Another group made it over 100 miles south before a Texas Ranger, noticing their weary, mud-caked appearance at a roadblock, engaged them in a conversation about the weather and instantly detected their foreign speech patterns. The manhunt became a series of small, human dramas played out across hundreds of square miles. Captain Jürgen Reinert was the last to be caught. He and his partner had made it to within 150 miles of the Mexican border. They had traveled almost exclusively at night, navigating by the stars with the skill of a seasoned mariner. They were finally tracked down by a posse on horseback, cornered in a dry creek bed. Reinert, gaunt but unbroken, surrendered with quiet dignity. Within 2 weeks of the breakout, all 25 escapees were back in custody. The consequences were swift. The captured men were placed in solitary confinement at Camp Hearne, their rations reduced to bread and water for 30 days. The maximum punishment allowed under the Geneva Convention. The escape sent shockwaves through the entire POW camp system in the United States. Inspections were immediately intensified at every facility. The American commander at Hearne was relieved of his duty, his career effectively over. For the remaining prisoners, life became harder. Privileges were revoked. Work details were made more strenuous, and the previously lax atmosphere was replaced by one of rigid, suspicious security. The Great Escape had failed in its ultimate objective, but it had succeeded in shattering the illusion of American invincibility on its own soil. In the aftermath of the war, the story of the Great Texas Escape was largely forgotten, buried under the weight of far grander historical events like the Yalta Conference and the fall of Berlin. Camp Hearne was dismantled, its tar paper barracks sold for scrap, and the land was eventually reclaimed by the persistent Texas prairie. For decades, the only physical evidence of the audacious breakout was a slight depression in the earth that would appear after a heavy rain, the ghost of a tunnel that once represented the most fervent hopes of 25 men. The fates of the conspirators were varied. Most were repatriated to a divided and ruined Germany in 1946. Franz Becker returned to aviation, becoming a pilot for the newly formed Lufthansa. The zealous Nazi, Klaus Richter, disappeared, rumored to have been arrested by Allied forces in Germany for his activities within the camp system. Captain Jürgen Reinert, the brilliant engineer, returned to his hometown near Hamburg and, according to letters held in local archives, resumed a quiet life as a naval architect, never speaking of his time as a prisoner of war. The story survived only in the local lore of Hearne, a tale told to children about the time the German army tried to tunnel its way out of their town. But the legacy of the escape is more than just a historical curiosity. It is a profound testament to the indomitable nature of the human spirit in the face of overwhelming odds. The tunnel was not merely a means of escape, it was an act of rebellion against the dehumanizing forces of captivity and despair. For 6 months, the men of the Ghost Factory had a purpose. They had a shared secret that bound them together against both their captors and their fanatical countrymen. They were no longer just prisoners. They were engineers, artists, and conspirators engaged in a battle of wits. The escape attempt, though a tactical failure, was a psychological triumph. It was a declaration that even in a Spartan camp surrounded by an endless prairie, thousands of miles from home, the mind could not be truly imprisoned. It remains a crucial footnote in the war's history, a reminder that the most compelling stories are often the ones hidden just beneath the surface, waiting for a chronicler to unearth them from the dust. The echo of their efforts serves as a powerful reminder that even in the most desolate of landscapes, the drive for freedom can inspire the truly extraordinary. If you found this hidden chapter of history as fascinating as we did, check out another one of our deep dives right here. Thank you for watching Default Content Channel. Don't forget to subscribe to Default Content Channel and hit the notification bell so you never miss another story from the margins of history.